especially those of you who were here last night. If you're able to make it again, that is. Maybe not, right? It was on New Year's Eve, New Year's night, New Year's Day. But I have a little extra time, so I wanted to take advantage of it. I'm so busy with work and stuff, during the week that my weekends are much more free, however. And so I'm trying to take advantage of it, the freedom that I have that is on the weekends to get my translation of Proverbs done, get as many videos out there so you guys have stuff you can enjoy when you want to. And I want to keep moving us through our different series, right? We have a variety of different series going on right now, as well as just videos we do because we have questions or things come up. But we also do, as part of our series of videos, one of our series that is, these text readings. Basically, they're just readings of the Bible. Well, they're readings of the translations that I've done to date. I've been involved with biblical studies, linguistics, grammar for 30 plus years. So I've been involved with public debates, professional published writings, and entered into discussions on issues that involve things like, excuse me, I've had this cough for the last couple of days. Nothing serious. It's like I almost got sick, but didn't. It barely hit me. Credit you out of that, of course. And I try to keep a strong immunity. So I apologize for that, though. Nevertheless, why we do these text readings is because, we think the Bible is a source of wisdom and knowledge, accurate history and understanding. So having the best understanding is going to give us the best opportunity to make the most of what books of the Bible have to offer, right? From all the ancient wisdom and knowledge of the past that is in large part still relevant today. Okay, I think I'm good now. You know what I'll do? I've got this I don't know if any of you like this coconut water. That's like CO2 water. If you might not. It's not like for everybody, but it's very good source of hydration and electrolytes like potassium. Very good source of potassium. There's a decent amount of calcium in there too, and it's coconut water. I like this kind. There are several other brands. There's a more concentrated brand you should be careful of so that you don't pick the wrong one, right? If you want to try this, get the water, the coconut water. If you get the one that's thick, that's more concentrated, then it's going to taste really funny. Let me have a drink, actually. I think that'll help me with my little cough. It's very good. Very good. It's very hydrating, like I said, Good to see you, Robert R. I haven't seen you in a while, and I love pronouncing your last name. Makes me think of a pirate, not in a bad way, but so it's kind of funny to me. It's kind of amusing, or just it strikes me in an entertaining way. I don't know if that's your real last name or not, but it's kind of cool, right? No vowels, just R's. And cosmic power. I do cold showers for immunity. Well, they say that is good. Yeah. So, yeah, no, I feel very good. Like I said, it seemed like I was going to get hit with something, but then, I didn't. I just got a really light little dose, and that's good for me, right? I don't like being sick. I think that it debilitates you, obviously, right? So the healthier you are, the more you can accomplish. Outside the box, hello to you. So as I was saying, we have these text readings, right? And we go through the Bible progressively according to the text I've translated to date. And then sometimes we'll supplement it with other texts to get the better understanding of the context. But basically, because I've translated these texts over the course of my biblical studies and career, then I feel most comfortable with it, and I can defend it and explain it and take responsibility for my work far better than trying to defend someone else's, right? So that's why we do it this way. They're text readings according to what I've done. I've finished the entire book of Proverbs, Greek and Hebrew translation. It should be published in print form, available in paper, hardback, and digital in 2 to 3 months. So it's got an expanded appendix on the evidence that we have that identifies the biblical Messiah Jesus with the pre-human wisdom personified of Proverbs 8 and elsewhere. So I think you'll enjoy that. There's another version of that in an article I wrote called Jah Loves Her, Wisdom, His Son, the Word. You can find that on my Watching the Ministry blog, or just type that in, that title, plus Watching the Ministry, Greg Stafford, and it'll come up on Google. And I'm going to go back through and just clean up a lot of my older blogs too, just make sure they're, and I'll note any changes I make, but it'll mainly be for stylistic and just to update them a little, add links and stuff. I'm going to be doing more on that blog just because I want to complement the videos and things. And I'm going to do it in I think a way you'll find useful. So, I put a lot of information usually in the descriptions below each video. Sometimes not so much, sometimes more, but I'm going to really use the blog in a more expanded way to caption the videos and their content and basically represent in written form. A lot of you have been asking for that, right? Hey, Greg, can you put this in writing? Well, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to transcribe it, right? I mean, wait a minute. I don't know exactly what you said to outside the box, Cosmic Power, but I'm going to let it go because it seems like you're a decent person. Okay. GL, good morning to you. Glad to see you as well. So in terms of what I was saying, the expanded appendix and stuff, right? So I will be doing that, and I may either just probably keep using Watching the Ministry, or maybe create a separate blog and then just keep that one for what it was used for. And either way, it'll be basically a summation of each video, the key points. So I won't be leaving out, it'll only be the main details, basically. So you'll get a written, concise version of each video as I can get it done. That's a lot of blog articles, right? But it needs to be done because then I can put it in writing and in video and show that, the people out there claiming they're responding. No, not even close, right? More like not at all. More like they're a joke and they just lie to everybody, right? Well, okay. Well, everyone can tell. And if you think maybe they do and I'm wrong, well, then that's fine too, right? Everybody gets to choose. I'm not going to worry about it. Nor do I really ever, right? I just deal with the issues and I feel if I feel confident, right? If I wasn't confident, then I'd probably do a lot more of this written stuff and that. But I'm going to do it now because you guys keep asking, and I think it will complement the videos and make them more useful together. But I just haven't done it for a while because to me, it's so settled, right? A lot of these issues are so resolved. But, I guess they'll always be that way, where there'll always be issues and many of us will always think they're already resolved. And there'll be new people, right? People turn 13 every day. They turn 16 every day. They turn 18 every day, 21 every day, right? 50 every day. There are always going to be new people, no matter how old the issues become. So probably that's in large part why we have to keep doing it, right? Oh, that's great, Cosmic Power. He says, I said hello to my friend. We both follow your channel. He has much respect for you, too. I appreciate that. Well, glad to have both of you, of course. So hopefully it sounds like it's been beneficial to you both. And I'm glad to hear that. So that's the goal, right? We want to benefit from our association, no matter where we are on the earth. And just try to come together with a shared understanding of key issues that we can use to benefit ourselves and everybody else while we praise the one who gave us the opportunity to do all these things, right? If we don't do that, our whole life is just thinking about ourselves and we never acknowledge the one who allowed us to think about ourselves, then we're failing fundamentally, aren't we? It's all really for the praise of God in terms of how we behave, what we do. We're not perfect, but we try to be as best as we good as we can to get along. We can't always work things out, right? Some people just won't listen, or maybe they think we won't listen, and that's just the way it is, and we have to go forward. As long as we're honest with ourselves and we genuinely can say we have done what we believe we should have done and checked everything to the extent that is possible, then we should be fine, whether people agree with us or not. If we are comfortable that we have established for ourselves this is correct, and we understand what other people are saying, but we can see it's not correct, but they don't see it, sometimes you're not going to be able to show that. They're not going to come around. It's just the way it is. Maybe it's temporary, right? Maybe that's how we were at one time and we eventually came around. Okay, well, so don't lose heart, right? Don't feel like just because someone's not believing you or people don't think you're correct, maybe they'll come around. Try to have hope, right? Love. What does love do? Love believes all things, not recklessly, right? Not like I just believe everything. Oh, yeah, I believe you say the end's coming tomorrow. Oh, I believe you. No, that's not what it is. We believe in all things that are to be believed in, to hope in the things that God hopes in. What, right? That we'll do what's right. Well, we should have that same mindset without foolishly putting ourselves in a position where we could get damaged by not recognizing the danger someone might present. Outside of that, we should always have hope and never think like they're just going to be destroyed, right? Maybe sometimes that we deal with some people, right, and they're so out of line. It's like, whoa. But for the most part, we shouldn't be thinking like that. And we got Miro. Miro is here. I was thinking this would be the time we would most likely get Miro because of he's on the other side of the planet, right, in Europe, basically. So his time schedule's hard to meet unless it's done like I think right around this time. Everett, good to see you, Everett. So I appreciate all of you joining me. We're gonna do another video later today, jaw willing, right? Like 10% chance I'll get too busy, but I actually think it like if I 90%, that's almost guaranteed. But let's see. The video I will do later, and we're gonna start the text reading right now. It's not a long one. We'll get right to it. It does talk about the being placed as firstborn, though. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk later today about early Christian views of Jesus, another series we have going. Shepherd of Hermas. Don't miss it if you can make it. All right, so let's get to our text reading now. Let me go ahead and just move you guys over. Position the text that I clipped so it matches the alignment with the split screen we typically use. Try to do that beforehand, but for whatever reason, I guess I didn't forward from my other computer. I want to use early in the morning to do some of this stuff, and then I'll send it to this one, which is more like my video setup. Doesn't look like I sent over the text the way I wanted to, so let me just... I wonder if that would look good. Let's see how it looks for you guys. That should have been there too. Okay. We'll just make that bold. A little bigger too, right? Why not? Fill the whole page. Okay. And so that looks pretty good in terms of you guys, right? I think that's pretty viewable. That's why I like to do it. And of course, these are my translations, so it's not like I can use NWT here, right? This text I have of the NWT, it's not... I'd have to make a whole new copy to make it bigger. But it fits the whole thing on the screen, you know. So it's actually very useful in some ways. It's just not very big if you're like I guess it's readable, depending on what kind of screen you're using, but either way, obviously I prefer a fuller text. So we are going to be doing, I'm going to just do a brief intro in case I don't keep the pre-show. If, sometimes I will, sometimes I won't, depends on the material. Okay, so let me just do that real quickly and also pop you guys out there. I have you connected to my what they call the live studio. So but I can pop you guys out separately and put you on the screen right here. I'll show you that. Right, like right here. Oh, you can't really see it, huh? So, but basically, if I move this, I guess, can I move that? Yeah. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at you guys on the far right. I got to make it a little bit, I got to push it over a little to see all your names. But that's what I'm looking at. In addition to, of course, I'm reading the text, but I want to make sure I don't ignore you guys if there's something like important or related. So let me go ahead and move you over so I can see who's talking. If I do that, there we go. All right, let's do it. Welcome to Text Readings with Greg Stafford, where we progressively work our way through the ancient biblical books and records. Our goal is to become as familiar as possible with the material that is contained in the books of the Bible. At times, we also consider non biblical ancient texts if they relate to the Bible. But primarily, we work through the biblical books from Genesis to Revelation. We started these text readings several years ago when I was doing day texts after I was just starting to do translation work formally. I started to tweet my translations, and then that led to day text videos, which turned into text readings when we got into a little bit lengthier material, right? So versus a verse or two as a textual reading, a daily reminder type thing. We, because of the material being translated, had a lot more narrative to include. And so it's more of a reading, right? A text reading versus just a day text to keep in your mind. So if you're reading, for example, 15 verses of Genesis 1, right? That's a lot of material to just keep in mind all day. But it's material that if you think about and study as a text reading, you can eventually ingrain and benefit from in more detail, right? So it morphed from day text to text readings, and that's where we are. We started in the New Testament letters. So we haven't done like the four great messages or gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We will. We're kind of just coming out of the middle of the Psalms of what I've done. There's still more to go. A little less than half of what I've done to go. I might add a little bit more before our next Psalms text reading because I want to get more of the text that I already have. I think it will be better. And then we'll move right into Proverbs after Psalms, which I've done the whole thing. So we'll be there for a while. But eventually we'll just keep going. We'll go right back through the New Testament. We'll go right back to Genesis. And I will have more material. Maybe we won't do the exact same material we've already done, unless there's a video we want to redo or think could be done better. So we have the options of really continually upgrading our text reading video content as we complete the entire Bible so that it represents our best understanding of these texts consistently. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to be reading Psalms 75, 4 through 7, and 89, 27 through 28. That may not sound like a lot of texts, and it's not really, but we're doing the Hebrew and the Greek. So instead of just being 6, 8 verses. It's really 16. Let's take a look. Psalm 75, verses 4 through 7. And Psalm 89, 27 through 29. 28. I better write it up here, right? Because even though it's on the thumbnail, I don't want any inconsistency. So we'll just put it here. All those 8s, 9s, and 2s right there, huh? In any case, let's start with Psalm 75. I have the Hebrew marked by an H and the Greek marked by a G. right next to each other, so we'll read both, and you'll be able to see how close they are to each other. Now, in my Proverbs translation and in my translation of Psalms, ultimately, any changes or significant differences between the Hebrew and Greek will be noted. And I believe I am following that practice in the Psalms right now, but it's not as refined as Proverbs. I've gone through the material in Proverbs several times, and I have not gone through Psalms several times like that. So I have a lot more work to do here, but you'll still be able to tell how close they are. And I think, as I said, do I have any pluses or minuses? Typically, I would be noting differences with a plus or minus sign. And then whichever has the plus, meaning more material than the other one, like if you see G plus, that means the Greek text has more material different than the Hebrew. Or same if you see H plus and G minus, same thing. I italicize the part that is different. So you'll immediately be able to see where they're the same and where they're not. If they're just saying the same thing but with somewhat different wording, I explain this all in my introduction. I give examples so you know what I'm talking about. That's not a plus or minus thing. That's just a different way of saying the same thing. I'm talking about differences in the actual text that aren't the same in any way or correspond in any way to the other text. Not a lot of material, but it's there, and it is important because the New Testament regularly quotes the Greek translation of the Old Testament. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any of that here, though, any plus or minus stuff. Psalm 75, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Good to see you, Sonia, back again. Very nice to see you. All of you who have made it back. And if it's your first time, I realize a lot of you couldn't be here last night. I'll be back later today. Shepherd of Hermas. If you're available, I encourage you to join me. I think you'll find it interesting, if you haven't read it already, to find that out. Either way, we'll break it down, right? Talk about how the Shepherd of Hermas presents Jesus primarily. But I'm also going to be getting more into the Holy Spirit here. It is more subject that I think needs to be addressed, and I don't have like a separate review of the development of the Holy Spirit going. But where I see it in our early Christian writers leading up to the Nicene and post-Nicene fathers that we'll get to on the Bible and Trinity Conflict series, where I see any significant discussion or reference to the Holy Spirit, I'm gonna include that as well. All right, Psalm 75, verse 4, Hebrew text. I have said to those who make arrogant boasts, you should not act arrogantly. And I have said to wicked ones, you should not glorify strength. Psalm 75, 4, Greek translation. I said to those breaking the law, you must not break the law. And to the ones sinning, you must not exalt your strength. Right? See, there's a use of exalt, right? Notice the difference between that kind of exalt, right? You're basically praising, right? There's a sense of exalt that involves praise or lifting up in song type stuff. And there's an exalt that means to actually elevate. We have some Trinitarians who have a difficulty with that. So I pointed out here and there, and this is in the end, it's going to come up. But I'm pointing out this initial instance so you can see the difference between exalting something like your strength, right? If you're exalting your strength, what are you doing? You're praising it. You're boasting about it, right? In the Hebrew, it says you not glorify strength. Right? So it means you're bringing attention to it. You're praising your strength. Praise. That's the exaltation and glorifying being talked about there. There's another sense of exaltation and glorifying that involves elevation. It might involve praise also, but it's directly connected to elevation of an individual, right? Not praising yourself. There's no elevation there other than in your own mind and in your own exaltation of yourself. We're talking about our use of exaltation where there's actual lifting up higher than you were before, positionally. Psalm 75, verse 5, Hebrew text, do not exalt your own strength before heaven, so that you might speak with arrogance or from an arrogant position. Psalm 75, 5, Greek translation, you must not exalt your own strength against heaven. You must not speak with unrighteousness against God. To us, a lot of this is pretty basic stuff, right? But doesn't matter. Just like we can take a basic text or two like these and highlight the use of exaltation of something that doesn't get a higher position in actuality, right? It's more just a praising of something and elevating in that sense. And there's much more as well, plus these are important reminders, and it shows the strength and moral character of our text, right? We don't run around acting arrogant, breaking laws, exalting our own strength, right? We don't go around looking into the camera making muscle shots or wearing shirts with dumb messages that praise yourself or somehow connect yourself with non-Christian ideas and heroes of the world, just so you can try to be thought of as something like that? Is that the idea? You all know who I'm talking about, right? There are a lot of people who pretend to actually care about God and Jesus, and yet they do like it's not like we all make mistakes, right? This is a given. But there are some who are like, they're not mistakes, right? It's like repeated intentional action and self-praise, and yet they're claiming to glorify God and Jesus. So how can you glorify God and Jesus when you're praising yourself? That ain't happening. Sorry. You want as little attention on yourself as possible, especially if you're in a public position, right? You shouldn't be doing wild things and trying to pose in weird ways that are supposed to glorify your strength, even though it's in a seemingly wrecked body. Certainly a destroyed mind, right? Either way, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to link ourselves and say we're like Bruce Lee, or like Elvis in our ministry. Would that be a good idea, you think? We know we all know. So, as weird as it sounds, people who are new, it gets weirder. There are people out there who you wouldn't believe what they do, and we're like, wow, okay. Verse 6, Psalm 75, because it is not from the east, and it is not from the west, and it is not from the wilderness that one is exalted. Because exaltation is not from the east. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the Hebrew Greek text, Psalm 75:6. Because exaltation is not from the east, it is not from the west, and it is not from the desert mountains. Psalm 75:7 Hebrew text, for God is the one judging. This one he will bring low or humiliate, and that one he will raise up or exalt. Greek translation, verse 7, for God is judge. This one he humiliates, that one he exalts. Right? This is not necessarily exaltation to a new position, right? If God is a judge in a court of law and you have an opponent with you and the judge humiliates your opponent at law, and favors you and says you were correct, that's exaltation. That's what it's happening. That's what it's talking about. Humiliating someone versus exalting someone as judge. So remember, though, we know some people, they don't care. They don't understand the different meanings of words unless it benefits them. Then all of a sudden they figure that out. But otherwise, right, whether it's the word God, they're never going to tell you, Trinitarians in this case, they're never going to tell you what they're talking about. Every single time they use the word God, they don't mean God. They don't mean a Trinity. Maybe a couple times in their mind they would, if it's like one God and they think that's the Trinity. They never mean that any of the persons are the Trinity. So anytime one of the persons is called God, they don't mean the Trinity. Well, what do they mean then? They mean person of God. They change a word into an expression, right? And so the individual reference is not God or a God. It's a person of God, and the God that the person is of is the Trinity, assumed from the start as the foundation for how they interpret the Bible. We'll get to all that. We've talked about many times, but it's important you remember that. People forget, right? Whether it's the word exalt, and they can't understand the difference between exalting in terms of a higher position and exalting in terms of favoring or praising. Can't. They won't. So you have to. You have to be the one who knows, okay, I can see you won't accept that exalt has different meanings that don't always involve a higher position in actuality. But it often does also. You're going to see that in a minute. I can see you don't recognize that, and you keep lying to everybody about what exalt means in this text or that text. So I know what it means. I've shown you that exalt does not have to involve an elevated position, right? So God can be exalted, lifted up in praise or song, glorified in the same way that one would glorify one's own strength. That is not the same thing as being given a higher position that's specified as at God's right hand in this case, by the way. The position is specified. It specifies that all authority is given to this individual and power. It specifies that all the spirit beings in heaven are made subject to him. These all involve positional, authoritative elevation. That is never the case with God, right? No one has to make God's angels subject to him. Right? That alone should tell any reasonable person. The fact that 1 Peter 2:21 says that. Says that that all these things were made subject to. Well, then they weren't subject to him before. And you say he was a God, man, on earth, so that they should have been subject to him at all times. And yet he even says, well, on earth, that he'd have to appeal to the Father, the very one who subjected all things to him, according to 1 Corinthians 15. Right? It all flows together so perfectly. Then enter the Trinity, right? Enter the dragon. Enter the false doctrine. Psalm 89. All right, this is going to be good stuff. It all is good, right? It's always good to have you guys with us. Yeah, it'd be good to have you later. We'll see, Miro. I'll try to, maybe I'll do it a little earlier, like around 5. Let me know if 3 hours earlier than 8 my time would be better for you. I'll check the chat in a minute. Psalm 89, verse 27, Hebrew text. He himself, talking about David from verse 20, will call out to me, you are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. Psalm 89, 27, Greek translation. He, again, David from verse 20, will call out to me. This is God talking. You are my Father, my God, and a protector of my salvation. Psalm 89, 28. Oh. I can see out my front window. I heard something. I had to check. Psalm 89, 28. Also, first firstborn I will gift to him. In Hebrew, it is a form of the verb natan, to give. High up compared to kings of the earth. And we're clearly talking about an elevated position here, right? We'll get to this here in just a moment. Verse 28, Greek text, Psalm 89. Also, a firstborn I will make him. Greek is a form of tithemi. High in comparison to the kings of the earth. Now, as many of you know, and as we have talked about extensively in part 17 of the Bible and the Trinity and Conflict series, and in my writings, my JW's Defended, all three editions on Colossians 1, 15 through 17, I discuss this issue. And yet, we continue to get Trinitarians saying the exact same things over and over again. They don't listen, right? How can they? Because if they listen, what? It's over. And I think it's over even if we kind of give them their little false understanding of firstborn here. Because what? What are they saying? Trinitarians are saying firstborn. And then they've literally said this to me. And it's been in their writings when they talk about it. The firstborn here means preeminent. The firstborn has more than one meaning, right? Yeah, Greg. Deuteronomy 21:17 does define firstborn as the beginning of one's children or the beginning of his generative power, Hebrew or Greek. Now, they never really bring that up. I'm kind of doing it for them in this pretend dialogue. Yeah, Greg, it does define it that way in the Bible, and it's most often, like almost all, other than literally a handful of instances in the Old Testament and Apocrypha, other than a few instances where it's used differently, the Trinitarian would say, yes, it usually does mean like the beginning of one's generative power children, but it also has another meaning, Greg. It also can mean just preeminence. It just means preeminence. See, David is firstborn. And David wasn't God's firstborn or even firstborn. But God makes him firstborn, right? Even of the kings, right? He's not the first king. He's not the first king, Greg. He's not even the first king of Israel, Greg. So you see, it doesn't have to mean that he's like the start of something. That's not... The Trinitarians who say that are confusing meaning with use. Firstborn is literally defined in the text I just referenced, Deuteronomy 21:17. That's what it means. It does not say in that definition in Deuteronomy 21:17 that this one is the preeminent one. And even if it did say the preeminent one or mean preeminent one of God's children or of God's generative power, we'll just exchange beginning for preeminence, which is what Trinitarians do, right? How does that change anything? It might change it in terms of whether or not it's the very first one. But if we change Deuteronomy 21:17 from beginning of one's children or beginning of one's generative power to preeminent one of God's children or preeminent one of God's generative power, how does that not make him part of God's children? Or how does that not make him the consequence of God's generative power? Right? Because you can't be part of God's generative power unless you're not yet come out of the Father as part of all things. But the generative power is not the same as sons, right? You can be a part of the sons and therefore also be a consequence of one's generative power. But when it's specified as it is, Um, I believe it's in the Greek text. Greek, or we'll check, we'll verify that. One says generative power, one says children. It might be the Hebrew, actually. We'll verify that. I also have a video on that, a text reading on Deuteronomy 21:17. I just can't recall off the top of my head which one. We'll bring it up now. Deuteronomy 21:17. And we'll go back. So I want to make sure I tell you the right source for children or generative power. But my point is the same, right? You see where I'm going? How would that make the preeminent one of Deuteronomy 21:17 not a part of the children? And if you're part of the children and you're just the preeminent one of it, you were born. You still had a start. We're not even going to entertain the eternal generation insanity. It's totally nonsense. Has nothing to do with the Bible and is an invention of later times to contradict the Bible, and it contradicts itself, right? It's just ridiculous. It just shows you how far gone some people are in terms of their doctrine. So the Bible only uses son, right? It even uses son in a figurative way, right? It calls Ephraim my son, my firstborn. There's another one we talk about in a figurative sense, right? Jesus is obviously not a tribe. It's clearly a figurative use, like right here. And how we know right here is figurative? Not just another meaning of firstborn, like it can actually just mean preeminence, like protuon actually means. Colossians 1:18. Firstborn actually means the beginning of one's children or generative power. Deuteronomy 20, that's the definition in the Bible, everyone. We're not like reading another lexical source and saying that's what it means. We could do that based on its usage, of course. I did a whole video on it. But the Bible actually defines this word. It's one of those few words. It's actually like, here's what it means. You can't miss this. You'd have to be really crazy theologically or, have a whole nother motive than what is presented in the Bible to not understand this. It's like right there. But it doesn't agree with Trinitarian doctrine, so they don't care. So what do? They say, well, Psalm 89:28 shows that firstborn can just mean preeminent. Well, if that's the case, he's still one of the kings of the earth, is he not? See, this is the problem. Trinitarians don't understand. It's saying that the named subject, the specified subject, in relation to the group that is described, is a part of that group. Firstborn of the kings, or in comparison to the kings. Well, he's one of the kings, right? So even if you say this means preeminent, he's still one of the kings. That doesn't ever change. Colossians 1:18, firstborn from the dead. Well, was he not? He was dead. He was part of that group and the first one born from it as part of the resurrection to eternal life. So Trinitarians spend all their time and energy focusing on a different meaning for firstborn defined in the Bible for us without the meaning they give it, because the Trinitarians know that the firstborn is preeminent, right? The firstborn in the Bible gets a favored position, a favored portion, a favored inheritance. He's preeminent over others in those ways because he's firstborn. It doesn't mean preeminence. This is the fallacy Trinitarians make. Same with God, right? God doesn't mean person of God. That's what they mean by God based on later doctrine. Well, they don't have anything that just says firstborn means preeminent. They just cite these texts and say, well, it can't mean beginning of one's generative power or beginning of one's children here. It's talking about David and the kings. Yeah. Well, did you notice the verbs used? David is being gifted the position of firstborn. He's being made firstborn. That's not a literal use. That's not a context or accompanying terms that suggest the use is the same as other uses. other uses, whether it's the firstborn of an individual, the firstborn of an animal, don't have these qualifying terms. And when the subject, like Ephraim, is clearly not a person or an individual, that's a false analogy. No one believes Ephraim is literally a firstborn child or a son. It calls him his son. Well, does son mean son? See, Trinitarians, they just redefine everything. Firstborn doesn't really mean the first one born. Yeah, it actually does in almost every instance and in the definition of the Bible. It just has a handful of uses, not with a different meaning. It's a different use. David is being what? He's being treated as firstborn, right? It's as if David were the actual firstborn of the kings of the earth. That's how he's being favored. It has nothing to do with a whole new meaning preeminent. That's a part of what the firstborn is. That's not what the word means. We already know what it means. The Bible tells us that. Trinitarians just deny it, and then they completely ignore the qualifying terms that make it clear that their parallel text to Colossians 1:15 or Hebrews 1:6 is not a parallel at all. None of Jesus is never said to have been made or gifted the firstborn. He is said to be made Lord, though. And that's very interesting, isn't it, right? Acts 2:36? Because he wasn't always Lord. Trinitarians, it's over. Why would he have to be made Lord, Trinitarians? He was Lord eternally. And that's not his human nature apart from his spirit nature being made Lord. One person, Trinitarians. And if you're saying his human nature is made Lord, then you can't mean that he's actually Jehovah as Lord in any of those texts that he's called Lord or one Lord, because it's his human nature according to you, and that's why it's different in Acts 2:36. See, you guys are so out of control, right? All this false doctrine just makes it impossible for you guys to just read the text, right? You'd never get any of this stuff that they're using to try to explain all this stuff away. You'd never get it from the Bible, right? So it never says Jesus is made the firstborn or placed as firstborn. He just is, Trinitarians. You see, if he was just Lord and it never said he was made Lord, you guys would go crazy with it. You would be like, see, he's Lord. No one made him Lord, right? If Philippians 2:9-11 didn't exist, for example, or Acts 2:36. Oh, of course they do. So, it's hypothetical. My point is, you guys would go crazy, right? You'd be like, he is Lord. And you often like to highlight the present verb for some reason, what like it means. Oh man, we got to do a whole show on the abuse of Greek verbs by Trinitarians, right? So he is the firstborn, Trinitarians. And firstborn means beginning of one's generative power, beginning of one's children. Sorry. And even when it is a term like protuon in Colossians 1:18 that is used to describe Jesus after firstborn's used, right? So they're both Trinitarians. They're two words, you know that? So it's not firstborn being used with two meanings. That's what you do. It's firstborn being used two different ways, literal and figurative, only for subjects that would actually have a term like firstborn applied to them, which would have to be a temporal subject, or it wouldn't fit. Wouldn't make any sense, Trinitarians. So it's always used of temporal subjects, literal or figurative. In Psalm 89:28, it explicitly states that the firstborn is being put in that position. It's not something he just is, similar to Jesus being made Lord. He's put in that position. He's elevated to a higher position, Trinitarians, as Lord. But when it comes to firstborn, he just is. Because firstborn, the meaning of the term itself, proves temporality. So much for your is, right? Depends on what a person or thing is. And that's what you fail to understand. So let's just take a quick look, though, at the extended context of this psalm. I wanted to show you more on this exaltation elevation. So if we go to the NWT, since it puts it all in one place, basically, right? Let's just take a look right here. Psalm 89:13, an arm with mightiness is yours. This is the psalmist speaking to Jah. Your hand is strong. Your right hand is exalted. Did David or anyone else raise up God's right hand higher than it already was? No, right? It's talking about, it's praising the strength of his right hand, right? Your hand is strong. Your right hand is exalted. It's worthy of praise, of glory. It's glorified just as it is. No elevation required, Trinitarians. Verse 14, righteousness and judgment are the established place of your throne. Loving kindness, trueness themselves come in before your face. Happy are the people knowing the joyful shouting, O Jehovah. The light of your face they will keep walking. In your name they are joyful all day long, and in your righteousness they are exalted. So how are people who are knowing the joyful shouting put in a higher position? In your name they are joyful. Joyful is paralleled with being exalted. It's talking about their spirit, right? Their praise and happiness and joy. There's no high position involved here. Now that is coming up, and so we're going to make that clear. Verse 17, for you are the beauty of their strength, and by your good will our horn is exalted. For our shield belongs to Jehovah, and our kings belong to the Holy One of Israel. At that time you spoke in a vision to your loyal servants, and you proceeded to say, I have placed help upon a mighty one. I have exalted a chosen one from among the people. Now look at that parallel. Here, more power, more strength is being given to the exalted chosen one. That suggests an elevation. Someone is being made mightier, right? That never is the case with God. He might be praised. People might view him in a different way. Nothing changes in terms of his strength, his position, his name, right? So now look at who it is. It's David. Verse 20, I have found David my servant. With my holy oil I have anointed him, with whom my own hand will be firm, whom my own arm will also strengthen. More power. This is now increasing the ability of the individual, the standing, right? Versus just people who are joyful all day long. Verse 22, no enemy will make exactions upon him, neither will any son of righteousness afflict him. And from before him I crushed his adversaries to pieces. To those intensely hating him I kept dealing out blows. My faithfulness and loving kindness are with him. In my name his horn is exalted. I apologize. And on the sea I have put his hand, and on the rivers his right hand. And he calls out to me, you are my Father, my God and the rock of my salvation. Also I myself shall place him as firstborn, the most high of the kings of the earth. So you can see right here, it becomes very clear. From verse 19 forward, at that time, a vision is given, and it says, I've put help upon a mighty one, and exalted a chosen one. I have anointed David. I have strengthened his arm. That's what all of this involves. The elevation of David to a higher position, as if he were the firstborn. He clearly is not, because he has to be made or placed it. Trinitarians just fail to actually read and understand the verse, only because of their doctrine. They're not stupid. They're quite aware of what it says. We've been telling them, and they've known even before we did. They don't care. To them, it's the same thing as Colossians 1:15, Hebrews 1:6, right? Even though, again, if Jesus is the firstborn of all creation, then he's a part of creation. He's just the firstborn in relation to it. Now, some Bibles mistranslate that expression as firstborn over all creation, but that still is not a figurative use. And so if you want to just emphasize for whatever reason the authority of the firstborn versus the definition in the Bible for the literal firstborn, the beginning of one's generative power, to parallel the actual use of firstborn a couple verses later, firstborn from the dead. And in verse 18, it says he's first in all things. The actual word for preeminence or first is used there, protuon. Well, if he's preeminent or first in all things, then he would have to be preeminent or the first of all things. If he's not a part of all things or creation in the broader sense, apart from him as the mediator, then this doesn't make any sense. Isn't God already in that position over creation? So why are we telling us what we already know if it's accepted that the Son is God in that sense? But he's not, right? He's called the firstborn. God is never called firstborn. He's the Father, one God the Father. Not only that, Jesus is called only begotten, monogenes. And it qualifies theos in John 1:18. So there's no way he could be the Father in that sense. There's no way the Father could be him in that sense, right? Only begotten, firstborn, Son. None of those terms fit God. They're never used of him. And they're defined and used in ways in the Bible that show clearly a temporal distinction that only becomes complicated and messed up several hundred years later as Trinitarianism became politically dominant, highly aggressive, and completely heretical, right? Completely merged with Rome at that time, in my view, becoming the dragon with two horns like a wild beast. Two horns like a lamb. And misleading the entire inhabited earth like Satan does, pretending to be something it's not. Whether that's true, that's not really important to me. It just seems like a potential, if not likely, historical connection. Either way, as you're going to see as we get closer to Athanasius and the creeds, they have nothing to do with the Bible. I mean, some of his writings, we'll get to it. You watch. We're going to talk about Shepherd of Hermas later today. But when it comes to this whole firstborn thing and all that, right, we've talked about so much. I wanted to talk a little bit more about it here so you can kind of see the difference between Trinitarians who lie and say that firstborn means two different things when it's really just used two different ways, literal or figurative, as many terms are, right? That doesn't change the literal uses into figurative, just like it doesn't change the figurative into literal. Trinitarians can't or refuse to figure that out. If they do, they're done, right? Doctrine's over. And as I said, I actually think Colossians 1:18, excuse me, no more coconut water. Colossians 1:18 is probably even better because they don't change their understanding of tapanta, right? I mean, firstborn's defined in the Bible, so it's hard to get better than that. But they've complicated it so much with their insanity and these false parallels. Yeah, it's still possible and probably worth wading through it to get them to see where they're wrong. Excuse me. But if you use Colossians 1:18 on this whole firstborn issue, or whether Jesus is created, you use Colossians 1:18. Excuse me 1 second. I hear one of my little signals going off. My apologies. Use Colossians 1:18 and you say, okay, let's set aside verse 15 right now, even though there's, to me, no question. It's defined in the Bible. It's not figurative. It's literal. What about verse 18? It says he's the first or preeminent in all things. So that would have to include creation, right? All things is creation. It literally is creation several times from verse 15 to verse 18. So they're either going to have to change what tapanta is in verse 18 or not, right? So if they change it, you can immediately say, well, look, you just said all things means all things. You just criticized the entity for using other. You just said that means you just can't be created. Now you're saying all things doesn't mean all things? Well, then what are you talking? Then why would I believe you about the other uses just immediately preceding? That's just your doctrine. The text doesn't say they're different. And what about verse 20, right? That's even more explicit in terms of it not meaning all things. And in verse 15 through 17, we have an explicit exception named, like Revelation 5. So, but verse 18, they either have to change what tapanta means, or they have to say that what? First doesn't mean first? It clearly does, right? Protuon. No one can argue protuon doesn't mean first or preeminent. So does all things mean all things or not? If he's the first or preeminent relative to all things, right? Doesn't even make, if he's not one of the all things that he's preeminent in relation to, who cares? What's the point of, why even bring up a group you're not part of to compare it with? It's the same with firstborn from the dead. Well, was he dead? Why are you saying he's firstborn from the dead if he wasn't dead? It doesn't make any sense, right? Why are you saying he's first in all things if he's not part of all things? Why are you saying he's the firstborn of all creation if he's not part of creation? No, it doesn't just mean preeminent over. In fact, that's never what it means. It's used a couple different ways, and they're always a part of the group named. So what are you talking about? Again, the complexity of the false doctrine is the only thing that makes this difficult. It's otherwise very clear and straightforward, right? So, probably one of the more effective ways to deal with the whole all things in Colossians 1 is just go to verse 18. Verse 20 is very good too, but verse 18 is a complication for them. Because first, preeminent of all things, right? That only makes sense if he's a part of the all things as preeminent one of it. In the same way that he's the firstborn of all creation. Now, right, we understand the difference in tapanta being made through and in him. But that's as the firstborn. So when his relationship with it is established, that's what it would say. It would say, refer to him and then tapanta or creation. Either one, he's preeminent and first in relation to it. They both say the same thing in different ways. They don't mean the same thing, protatikos and protuon, but they're saying the same thing ultimately when you look at it in context and you understand what all things mean, unless you're going to change that, right? So it puts the Trinitarians in a difficult position. They either have to, I don't see what they're going to say about protuon, right? No one denies that means preeminent or first. So they're going to have to try to explain that he's not a part of the all things that he's first or preeminent of, which makes no sense, right? What's even the point of it? And if firstborn in verse 15 already means that, and according to them it does, that's all it means, then why is it being restated in verse 18 that way? Just to say the same thing twice? Use two different words, one that's defined for us in the Bible that means something totally different than the second word? We just don't have any compelling reasons to believe you Trinitarians. It's a lot more compelling to believe what the Bible says when it comes to the definition of terms, the use of terms, and what they actually mean according to those definitions and uses. If you try to redefine it according to uses that come about hundreds of years later and ideas and thinking that's nowhere expressed in these texts, then what are we supposed to do? Well, there's nothing we can do, right? It's just them assuming their doctrine and accusing us of not believing something that they can't defend in the text. They're upset because we don't accept their assumed doctrine, right? They want us to become part of the whole church history and traditional doctrine. But why would we do that when it contradicts the earlier biblical Christian doctrine? Why would we accept, for example, understandings of God metaphysically from 325, the 4th century of Athanasius and Constantine, the Council of Nicaea? Why would we accept that over what the Bible says? That doesn't make any sense, especially when it contradicts it. So they're really just upset that we don't accept their false doctrine, their traditions. It's in the Bible, we accept it, okay? But it's not. And what is in the Bible is pretty clear unless we're talking to people who have all this later doctrine. Then all of a sudden, all this clarity goes out the window. It's crazy, huh? But we don't have to continually subject ourselves to that, thankfully. So in any case, we know it comes up, so I want to talk a little bit about it with you guys. It's part of our text reading. We're working our way through the Psalms, and it will help us get to the book of Proverbs more quickly, where we have a lot more material. I look forward to enjoying with you. And that will do it for today's text reading. We'll try to do these as often as possible. Later today, I do intend to do another video, a live stream on the early Christian views of Jesus, the Shepherd of Hermas, early Christian writing you may have heard of but not know a lot about. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to join me later today or watch the video whenever you can. I'll put a notice up, so if you're subscribed and you hit the all notifications, you'll be notified as soon as I put the actual thumbnail and time for the video later today up. Otherwise, I hope you all have an enjoyable New Year's Day, Sunday, and may God bless you. In Jesus' name.